So without further ado, I wanted to give the floor to Jeff Foss, who's going to be presenting his essay, quite interesting essay entitled From the Garden of Eden to Gaia's Brain, A New Humanism. So, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. What the heck? Oh, nice shades, man. Thank everybody who's here, and thank Jeff in particular for bringing me here. It is one of the most interesting things that's ever happened to me. The paper is about our changing relationship to the earth, and this brought to mind a joke. Man goes to the doctor, same doctor he sees every 6 months. He always goes to see the doctor says, "You're fine, go home." Comes to see the doctor one day, and the doctor says, "I got some bad news for you." And he says, "Okay, what is it?" He says, "You're gonna die." He says, "What?" He says, "You're gonna die." He says, "Oh, come on, man. I see you every 6 months. You don't tell me anything like this. Suddenly, I'm gonna die." He says, "Oh, I'm afraid it's true. You're gonna die." He says, "Oh, come on. Give me some shred of hope at least." The doctor says, "Well, you could try mud baths." The guy says, "Mud baths? Will that help?" The doctor says, "No, but it'll get you used to the dirt." Our changing relationships to the earth. Indeed, we all know this. We come from the earth and we return to the earth. And at some point, we feel alienated from it. And our relationship to the earth has changed in various ways. And I'm going to try to describe some of these here. I suppose just sort of to segue from Jeff's ideas, our relationship to the earth has largely been one of gaining and holding territory for a long time. And suddenly, that no longer is right. That no longer is interesting. Nobody even really is looking for that anymore. And so I'm trying to describe the change and present something as an alternative. This essay will develop mainly by means of metaphor, a fact which literally requires an explanation in this fundamentalist age, and of course scientists are fundamentalists too right now. The reason we must travel by means of metaphor is that the issues to be discussed are huge: the fate of the planet, the destiny of humankind, and the meaning of life. Only metaphors are capacious enough to contain vast bodies of necessary information and steer them among the ideas that guide the modern mind and towards the ideal I wish to unveil before you, its beauties to recommend as a worthy goal for our species. Humankind stands at yet another crossroads. We have just arrived at a crucial juncture in our history that Jeffrey Rubinoff has dubbed the end of the age of agriculture. Over the last 7 millennia or so, we have turned from our Darwinian origins as hunter-gatherer apes to agriculture as our source of food. Agriculture, in turn, required permanent settlements. Agriculture begat civilization. Civilization, in turn, by the power of the word, and yes, the power of metaphor itself, transformed us into modern scientific technological beings. Our trajectory has taken us from the Garden of Eden into spaceship Earth. The twin crises of the 1900s were, first, the climax of centuries of warfare on the brink of nuclear holocaust, and second, the climax of our technology on the brink of a deafeningly silent spring. These twin crises were, we can now see in retrospect, the explosive and implosive events marking the end of the age of agriculture. Agriculture and its twin civilization are not about to disappear, but they are being transformed even as we speak. This transformation may take us in any of several directions. I want to propose an ideal towards which we may progress, a focus for our imagination, a compass point by which we can navigate the perils ahead, a utopian vision that can be realized at least in part. I propose that we become the nervous system of the planet. Although Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis, the idea that the planet Earth is a superorganism, a biological entity as a whole, has been rejected on scientific grounds, and rightly so, I would add. There remains the very real possibility that we could transform the planet into a biological entity. The first function of the nervous system is to orchestrate the activities of the individual cells of a multicellular organism in order that it can be an organism in its own right. We are, each of us, composed of trillions of individual organisms. and it is our nervous systems that organize these cells and make possible such biological byproducts as thoughts, words, and essays. I just picked those out of the air. We can perform this organizing function for the planet as a whole. We can transform the Earth from a battleground upon which species compete with species and life struggles against the elements into a planetary organism, Gaia. We can, in other words, become Gaia's brain. The last element of my proposal, the ingredient that completes its chemistry, as it were, is its humanism. Odd as it may seem, our species has seldom taken action explicitly for its own good. We are deeply imbued with the idea that we are selfish and that the woes of this world, including warfare and environmental degradation, are the result of our singular vice of always putting ourselves first. This is far from the truth. Indeed, the very fact that we are instantly inclined to believe that we are selfish, greedy, and self-centered is part of the proof that this belief is merely a habit of thought. An addiction to an idea that gives us cheap and easy understanding and makes us compliant to the dictates of our religious and political masters. As Arthur Koestler argued, no soldier goes to war out of self-interest, much less greed. Soldiers are ready to die and fight from devotion, he calls it, devotion to ideals. And without this incredible willingness of Homo sapiens to make the ultimate sacrifice, war would be impossible. Simple self-gratification has never been enough to serve as the basis of any society, much less to motivate historical events. The victory of one's tribe, the triumph of one's country, the greater glory of one's God, the paradise of workers in an international brotherhood, these are the sorts of things that men and women serve. These are ideals, these are abstractions, these are metaphors to which we bow and for which we will kill or be killed. These are the motor neurons which activate the body politic to actions of historical dimensions. Humanism, by stark contrast, is the suggestion that we should instead act for our own good, at least sometimes. It is an idea of quite recent birth. Humanism emerged in Europe in the late 1300s as an awakening of humankind's awareness of itself. Humanists argue that human beings must understand their own nature and their place in the greater order of nature if they were to have any chance of fulfilling their own destiny. Against religious authority, which was based on the study and interpretation of Scripture, humanists proposed that human beings also study and interpret the book of nature. We cannot assume that God will guide us in our daily lives, procuring us food, clothing, shelter, justice, and clearing the garbage from the streets. God helps those who help themselves, so we had better learn to help ourselves. Humanists thus provided an argument for science and religious tolerance, which in turn laid the foundations for the modern world order. Humanists understood humankind as part of nature, not as opposed to it. Our good was understood to have its proper place in the fabric of nature. Our technology, our art, our science, even our pleasure was seen as natural, part and parcel of the meaning of the universe as a whole. Humanism, despite its sweetness and light, never really caught on. As a humanist, as a scholar within the humanities, that group of thinkers that seems forever marginalized by heftier actors like religion, politics, the arts, or science, I want to advance the humanist project. I want to shout it from the rooftops to all of mankind. Let us seek our own good. Our good is not opposed to the goodness of God or the goodness of nature. It is instead, and indeed, part of it, just as we are part of nature itself. Which part? Answering that question is the business of this essay. At a first approximation, we are the emerging nervous system of the planet. Even now, we can discern the forming outlines of the planetary embryo, the traces of its optical fiber axons, the clustering of its neurons and functional systems, the budding of its eyes and ears, and the first beginnings of planetary motor control. We are Gaia's developing brain. Part one, some reflections on metaphor. Since we're traveling by metaphor in this essay, it behooves us to stop and think for a moment just what this mode of intellectual transport involves. Let us be clear, right from the start, that it does not license nonsense or encourage flights of mere fancy. As a humanist, I'm used to being looked down upon by those thinkers who claim, at least, to work to a higher standard, namely that of literal truth. To these thinkers, all of whom ally themselves with science and self-identify as scientists, whether physical or social or practical scientists, I will point out that there is a vast body of literal fact that is included in the admittedly metaphorical idea that we are Gaia's embryonic brain. It is literally true that Homo sapiens' information processing surpasses that of organisms by many, of other organisms by many orders of magnitude in both quantity and quality. We are alone among the life forms of the planet when it comes to understanding the fundamental situation of life in general, that we have evolved over billions of years upon a planet that is orbiting around a medium-sized star at 29.79 kilometers per second. So we've traveled quite a bit since the beginning of the essay. Clearly there are uncountably many facts of this sort that we and we alone know. Moreover, I would remind scientific thinkers that they too rely on metaphor. The idea of nature as mechanism is itself a metaphor, indeed the central metaphor animating the scientific worldview. Scientific theories themselves are models of natural phenomena, and models are elaborate metaphors, namely analogies. When geologists tell us that a volcano is dormant, the use of the French word dormant may mask the fact that they are telling us that the volcano is asleep, but the metaphor remains under this mask. I mean, you wouldn't sound like much of a scientist if you said the volcano's asleep. But, you know, say it's dormant, oh, science. Much the same can and must be said of other scientific concepts. Darwin's natural selection is a metaphorical extension of the artificial selection he saw practiced by plant and animal breeders. Newton's concepts of work and energy were metaphorical extensions of human and animal work. The Latin word for work is ergon. And the inner potential for work, or in ergon, or energy. Examples of this sort could be multiplied indefinitely, but there's an easier way to cut to the chase, as they say in Vancouver, also in Hollywood, and that is through realizing a fact about language itself. There is no sharp boundary between the literal and the metaphorical. One way to come to this realization is by reflecting on the fact that even though the last sentence had a literal content, it nevertheless was a metaphor. The talk of a boundary between the metaphorical and the literal involves a transference of the logic surrounding countries and the holding of territories, not coincidentally an essential aspect of the age of agriculture, to the linguistic domain. Not literally a domain, of course, that's also a territorial concept, but only in the metaphorical sense of an academic specialty, the fences that divide up the intellectual territory, so to speak. Every word in the dictionary bears the telltale traces of its metaphorical growth into new areas of application. The most literal use of the word run refers to self-movement by motion of legs and feet. An animal can literally run down the street. But through metaphorical transference, fences also run between houses, as do the streets themselves. Dictionaries do not mark these meanings of the word run as metaphorical. They are instead listed among the many literal meanings of the word. As far as the dictionary is concerned, you are not branching out into metaphor when you say your nose is running, or that you are running for office, or that the last printing of your book ran to 500 copies, or that the paint is running down the wall, or that you got to run in your stocking, and so on and so forth. Like most words, in fact, English is kind of funny. Sometimes your feet can smell instead of run, and then your nose does the running for it, I guess. But I shouldn't play too long. Like most words, we can see that there was a primary use of run, namely for bipedal or quadrupedal or centipedal motion, and that this literal use then led to the metaphorical use of the term for other purposes, as for brooks that run downhill, cups that run over, and so on. As these metaphorical extensions of the term become common, they were incorporated into the literal definition of the word. So the literal is just frozen metaphor, although it's not literally frozen, of course. Or conversely, the metaphorical is just an extension of the literal, though it's not literally an extension. Thus, the metaphorical is, so to speak, the bastard offspring of sense and nonsense, and at that point I think I should be quiet. Given this preliminary realization that there are innumerable blends of the literal and the non-literal within language, it is now useful to draw some more precise distinctions. Some forms of the non-literal language are fairly straightforward. In overstatement, we exaggerate. It hit me like a ton of bricks. He had the strength of 1,000 men. In understatement, we minimize. A wound is called a scratch. $1 million is called small change, or chicken scratch. In sarcasm or irony, the meaning of words is reversed. How very clever, we say in response to some stupidity. Metaphor, our topic here, is grouped with simile, analogy, allegory, and the like, as carrying over the logic of one thing to a quite different thing, from the Greek meta, meaning over, and pherein, meaning carry. What then distinguishes metaphor from simile, analogy, allegory, and the rest? The official answer is that simile and analogy, allegory announce themselves. A simile says, for instance, she is like a butterfly, while a metaphor boldly says, she is a butterfly. While this is right so far as it goes, it does not seem, as it were, to get to the metaphorical heart of the matter. What is it really distinguishes metaphor from other non-literal uses of language? I put this question to Jeff Rubinoff while he showed me some of the works in the sculpture park on a very gray, breezy day, as it was called. And he instantly answered, you would die for a metaphor, but you would never die for a simile or an analogy. I like that. In fact, I think that it is true, and I want to say more or less literally true. And this is extremely important. Metaphors can have a power that other non-literal forms of language do not, and that is good, given that the business at hand, the destiny of humankind, demands such power. Gaia's brain is worth dying and living for. I'm going to skip to the top of the next paragraph because I don't think I have enough time to read the whole thing, frankly.
You're only 10 minutes. 10 or 11 minutes in. You started at 1:38 and it's 1:51.
Should I read that paragraph then, since everyone's following along at home?
Yeah, please do.
For all of those following along, TV land. The issues we are considering here require the power of metaphor if they are to be handled with the deftness and delicacy demanded. We must admit, nay, we must proclaim right at the outset that our metaphors must be handled with caution. Insofar as they are vague, they must submit to demands for clarification. Just as checks must be cashed for the value to be taken in hand, so too metaphors must be cashed for their literal meaning to be grasped. Given the limits of this single essay, we cannot cash out all or even most of our metaphors here, but we must nevertheless realize that they must be cashable if they are to work. And once again, unless we forget, metaphors are worth dying for. And thus, this is another reason that they have to be handled with caution. And I might add that they're worth living for, too. If the pen is mightier than the sword, then metaphors are fuel which can sometimes go nuclear. And since every battle requires organization, and organization requires the use of words, words, particularly metaphors, are just as much an essential part of a battle as are swords. And as the power of the word was magnified by the invention of the written word, so too is the power of the pen. So too the power of the pen exploded with Gutenberg's invention of the printing press, making our battles larger and larger, leading up to the global conflagration of war in the last century. That planetary phenomenon was stopped, as we all know, with two nuclear explosions, the twin infants of the following words: E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the square of the speed of light. Amazing words. Whether poet or physicist, the bewitching aura of these words is evident to your ear. Energy equals mass. Going really, really fast. In other words, everything is made of energy itself, and the amount of energy which a stone or you or I are made of is mystically tied to the speed of light, the highest velocity at which information flows. And it was this information, that E truly does equal mc squared, that brought us to the edge of nuclear holocaust. Words are, of course, the medium of exchange for information, the standard currency of information exchange. And so, yes, the pen is truly mightier than the sword, for the pen brought us to the edge of nuclear holocaust. And that has changed everything. The world is experiencing metamorphosis, and we are not quite sure yet what entity is emerging. Part 2, nuclear holocaust and the end of the age of agriculture. Perhaps the main consequence of nuclear holocaust was that it made war in its original sense as a battle in which there are literally no rules at all. All is fair in love and war, they say. I don't know whether that's true of love, but it is true of war by definition. And with the impossibility of war in that sense came the end of the age of agriculture. These facts are breathtaking from the human point of view and the humanist point of view, and significant even from the point of view of planet Earth itself. Understanding them requires unpacking the metaphors in which they are wrapped together. Nuclear holocaust is a metaphor. A holocaust is a burnt offering. Burnt offering, something that is sacrificed by being totally consumed by fire. Hollow is an hologram. Whole, burnt whole. There is no more horrific way to die than by fire, and nuclear holocaust is the image of humankind sacrificed whole and horrifically to nuclear fire. Nuclear fire, to use the physicist's nickname for the direct conversion of mass to energy by the inner chemistry of atoms in their nuclear cores, is the very source of power used by the mighty sun itself. The Pandora's box opened by the physical formula E equals mc squared made the sort of power available to us that magicians of old could only imagine. Our nuclear wizards concocted their deadly mixture of isotopes, and the fire of the sun burnt here on Earth, incinerating all flesh close enough to a point designated by the runic phrase, ground zero. In his famous, now there's the Earth, ground zero. In his famous image of nuclear holocaust in his novel On the Beach, Neville Shute pictured us dying off not in the flash of nuclear fire, but slowly in the grips of nuclear poisoning. Nuclear poisoning equals, here's another identity for you, death by nausea. And this equation led in Schute's vision to mass suicide and a sort of spiritual starvation of the human race as it withered slowly away while the rest of nature seemed to survive more or less intact. This was fitting punishment for our crimes. We were guilty of all of the horrors of war, albeit on a new and global scale. The first half of the 1900s were the age of world war, the big WW1, WW2, a new phenomenon made possible by worldwide communication, by the acceleration of words to the speed of light by telephone and radio. We were guilty of systematic attacks on civilian populations. We had learned long ago that war must attack the economic root of the enemy in order to be victorious. But now, on a global scale, this systematic, impersonal murder for territory, which is the basis of agriculture and hence of civilization itself, was augmented by a holocaust of another and familiar sort, genocide. The word Holocaust is also used to refer to the systematic murder of Jews by the Axis powers of World War II, one of the largest manifestations of tribal warfare in the 20th centuries, one which the Allied powers did nothing about until it was too late. It was entirely fitting that we, humankind, the guilty party, should vanish from the face of the earth while life went on without us. Such was Schute's vision of nuclear holocaust, and it spread among humankind with chilling effect. It was no accident that the Jewish Holocaust is the metaphorical twin of nuclear holocaust. They represent the twin crisis points of warfare and its tribal and agricultural forms. Both forms of human organization, the tribe and the state, the latter being the expression of the agricultural requirement of territory, persist today, but they have come to their Armageddon. Neither the tribe nor its territory can be preserved, much less enlarged, by nuclear warfare. Controlled, non-nuclear conflict is still a lively and indeed active possibility. But warfare in the core sense of the term is conflict in which there are no rules and nothing is sacred has become impossible. Warfare is impossible precisely because unrestricted conflict entails nuclear weapons. But nuclear weapons cannot possibly gain the fruits of war, winning more territory for one's tribe, one's kinsmen, one's fellow citizens. To put it bluntly, neither the rulers nor their generals can get out of the metaphorical line of fire, and so they've lost all their enthusiasm for war. They much prefer to control nuclear weapons and sign treaties banning even the testing of nuclear fires here on the surface of Earth, or even below. When you see them doing this, you are witnessing the end of the age of agriculture. Part 3, our expulsion from the Garden of Eden into agriculture and civilization. So this is an earlier change. Look at this for a minute. To understand the options in front of us, we must understand our changing relationship with the rest of nature. This is the subject of Beyond Environmentalism, a philosophy of nature, in which I present an argument for starting a new philosophical specialty, the philosophy of nature. This philosophical study will differ from environmentalism in a fundamental way. It will begin with the fact that we human beings, we members of the species Homo sapiens, are entirely natural, having come from the womb of nature, and remaining to this day firmly and inescapably part of the natural order. Not only us, but our food, our clothing, our shelter, in a word, all of our technology are integral parts and products of nature. That includes, therefore, nuclear fire. Just as in our primordial beginnings, it included ordinary fire. From our earliest beginnings, even as far back as our ancestral Homo habilis form, our species has used fire. Human-controlled fires, including those used for flushing game from forests or fields, or clearing forests or fields for agriculture, are completely natural phenomena. So too, therefore, are our nuclear fires, and our rocket ships and telecommunication satellites and all of the other wonders of modern technology. How did we ever get the notion that we are opposed to the natural order? In fact, I'm sure you still have that notion. I'm sure I still have that notion. It's hard to shake, but it can't be true. How do we ever get the notion that we're opposed to the natural order, that we somehow stand outside it? Why is it that even today the idea that a cell phone is just as natural as a dandelion rings hollow in our ears? In the distant future, fossilized automobile-bearing strata of our planet will be just as natural as the fossilized dinosaur-bearing strata. And a similar arrangement will be found on every planet in which there is advanced life. That is, you'll find the automobile-bearing strata will always be above the dinosaur-bearing strata, or primitive animal strata. Why do we feel that we are separate from nature, or alienated from nature? It is common practice at this point to the peculiarities of Western religion and to locate the blame, yes, blame, there. Why blame? Because we feel guilty for our perceived distance from the rest of the natural order, and guilt must be expiated. And there is no doubt that the pagan religions that preceded Western monotheism did not divide us nearly as severely from nature. But even paganism did portray us as alienated from nature, as the ancient myth of Prometheus shows. In that myth, it's like our Frankenstein myth. I mean, there was an original story presumably told by someone to someone about Prometheus, but amongst the Greeks, everyone knew what Prometheus was about. And there are all sorts of different shows about Prometheus, just like we have so many different shows about Frankenstein, right? And we have Frankenfoods and Franken this, Franken. Just like we have so many, as it were, media presentations of vampires. I mean, Prometheus was a myth in that sense. It was something that captured everyone's imagination amongst the pagans. And in that myth, the pagan gods had decided to exterminate our species, but were stopped from doing so when Prometheus stole fire from the gods and made us their match, thereby permitting us to survive. Promethean fire was a metaphor for the inner fire of human intelligence and of its fruits, all of our technology, as the ancient texts show. And Aeschylus's Prometheus Unbound, Prometheus, he's freed and he's apologizing now. He's seeking our forgiveness. And he seeks forgiveness, not only for giving us fire, but for the divination of dreams, which was considered to be technology, medicine, shipbuilding, agriculture, and architecture. In a word, Prometheus gave us civilization, thus angering the gods. The pagan Prometheus myth agrees with the monotheistic Garden of Eden myth on the most primordial fact. In the far distant past, we were like other animals, hunting and gathering in the forests and fields. That's precisely what Aeschylus says. That's what Prometheus is saying. We were like animals then. But then we got fire, stone tools, and technology, and that has made us incredibly and obviously different from the rest of the natural order. Nothing. No other animal does what we do. I mean, I could point to the building. Obviously, no other animal does something quite like that. But I could point to a pizza, too. Right? Homo pizza. We are the only animals that makes pizza. We're very, very different. It's only a small step from thinking we're different to imagining that we're not part of that order at all, that we are not of this earth, but hopefully from piously of the heavens above. But science has revealed that we are not gods, not even small g pagan gods, not even demigods, not even semi-divine and immortal creations of the one and infinitely remote capital G God of Western monotheism. We are instead large-brained apes, a branch of the tree of life that gained a decisive advantage in the evolutionary struggle by virtue of that large brain and our nimble fingers. Even so, the myth of the primordial garden turns out to be correct about a fundamental truth, the reality of our human genesis. There was a time when we lived more like other animals, hunting and gathering with our animal brothers and sisters for the fruits of the earth. Perhaps because we identify our ancient historical origins with comforts and blessings of childhood, we tend to see our origins through a romantic haze. Looking in the other direction, from the other direction, we tend to see our adoption of agriculture and the development of civilization as a sin. The sense of alienation from nature, of having sinned against nature, is an essential part of the Garden of Eden metaphor, just as it was an essential part of the Prometheus metaphor. We did not just decide to leave Eden, we were thrown out for eating the fruit of knowledge. Knowledge, once again. Right? In fact, the word Lucifer means bringer of light. Right? Also, Prometheus, bringer of fire. Prometheus was punished for his theft of fire by being chained to a rock so that birds of prey could peck away at his liver each and every day. Human visions of hell are always so much more plausible than human visions of heaven. Have you noticed that? I can imagine being tortured forever and burnt and burnt and burnt. That's easy to picture. But what is heaven like? Big golf course? Very deep moorage, large ship? What is this? Gold taps in the bathroom? I have a hard time picturing it. Or endless orgasm. After about 5 seconds, that gets boring. Well, certainly 5 minutes, and you get like an idiot. So what is heaven? You can't form a picture. Hell's very clear, anyways. Hell's clear. Heaven. Anyways, there's one. You get your liver picked out every day by birds of prey. That's pretty bad. Environmentalists are still motivated in large part by the mythical guilt associated with our development of agriculture and everything that flowed from that: civilization, technology, and industrial revolution. I think these myths come from that realization that we have become agriculturalists, civilized people. We have separated ourselves from, in that sense, from nature. As industrial counter-revolutionaries, environmentalists long for our hunter-gatherer days. They would like us to return to the Garden of Eden. They would like to take control, in the Garden of Eden where you could talk to the animals and we were all friends. They would like to take control of the fire given us by Prometheus under the guise of controlling greenhouse gases. They want us to scale back our use of fire, to use less energy, to return to simpler ways, to repent of all of the economic forms that humankind has taken. There is only one that is emotionally acceptable to them: the hunter-gatherer form. They want us to walk, not ride. They want us to eat local food and wear clothes spun from the wool of local sheep. They want us to return as close as is humanly possible to the small hunter-gatherer groups from which we sprung. This, I propose, is a huge, albeit understandable, mistake. There is very little to recommend hunting. I've tried it. I don't like it. I'm not much for gathering either, given the chance. The solution to the problems we now face is not to be found in the Darwinian depths of our genesis. We should indeed seek to make peace with the rest of nature. But that does not mean that we should try to return to the Garden of Eden, which was, after all, only a myth, only a metaphor. There never was such a place or such a friendly relationship between humankind and the rest of nature. Homo sapiens, like all of the species, is in a constant struggle to survive, a battle on two fronts. First, there is the battle of all living things, that all living things must wage against the elements merely to survive. The earth, air, fire, and water from which we arose still afflict all life with earthquake, flood, storm, frost, famine, drought, and even ice ages. Secondly, there is the battle of each of us, each living thing, with all of the rest, the evolutionary struggle. So even though we all spring from nature, we must nevertheless struggle with it to survive. Because of our big brains and nimble hands, human beings have been the first to gain the upper hand in this ongoing struggle. As we look around us to see the other species held at bay and the very elements themselves deflected by our shelters, we have once again assumed a posture of guilt and repentance. But we must not, despite the romantic vision of the environmentalists, try to return to the garden that never was. We must instead go forward. We must awaken to the new realities rather than continue to dream the old dreams. We are on spaceship Earth, not in the Garden of Eden. We must see that it is the growth of intelligence and information technology that is the real harbinger of the future, and that our future lies in carefully, respectfully getting our hands on the controls of spaceship Earth. We're a bunch of kids. We woke up, we find ourselves on the spaceship. What are we going to do? Well, be careful, of course, but...
2 minutes?
Okay. I got to go...
But you can go another 10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes, so I think I'm
Another few pages.
I think just about there. Nuclear weapons are not the shape of things to come, but the final punctuation marks of the end of the age of agriculture. The bombs that exploded at Hiroshima and Nagasaki are like the two dots of a full colon at the end of a sentence. What comes after is up to us. Here's the shining possibility I want humankind to see. We could become Earth's nervous system. Our big brains, coupled with the acceleration of the word to the speed of light by modern information technology and the internet, present us with the possibility of being reunited with nature in a way never before contemplated, as Gaia's brain. We can be united with the natural world in the same way that an animal's nervous system is united with the rest of the animal in which it resides. You can't get any closer than that. Part 4, and mercifully the last. We are the destiny of the planet. Or maybe it's not. We are the destiny of the planet. As a human being and a humanist, I am profoundly interested in the destiny of humankind. As a humanist, I want to see humankind prosper. Contrary to the mindset encouraged by the fundamentalist strand that runs through the very concept of environmentalism, I believe that human prosperity is not in conflict with the prosperity of nature as a whole. There are many signs that Homo sapiens is uniquely designed to assume the role of Earth's planetary nervous system, and that this does not entail denying our own prosperity or repealing the Industrial Revolution. To begin with, we are, to employ yet another metaphor for our species, informivores. Whereas other species hunt and gather information in order to live, we have taken this a step further. We live in order to consume information. Our arts, our sciences, our religions, our humanities, which are themselves creatures composed of words and information, have taken flight with the dawning of the information age. Consuming choice bits of this information, turning them over in our minds, recreating them, and then passing them on transformed to our fellow human beings, has always been one of the most desired and most fulfilling aspects of modern human life. In fact, we're doing it right now. We love our music, our dramas, our literature, our spirituality. We have always communicated to an extent unmatched by any other organism. We have always lived in a world enlarged and enriched by flows of information from distant places and distant times. The speed at which these distances are traversed has reached c, the same c that occurs at E=mc squared, the speed of light, changing everything in ways that we are just beginning to glimpse and understand. There are many additional properties of our species that make us apt for the job of serving as a planetary nervous system, but we can only consider one more within the confines of this essay. Our ability to sympathize with things apparently unlike ourselves. Efficiency suggests that we turn here to an event from my own experience that captures many of the tensions of modern human life and our relationship to nature. Like so many human families down through the millennia, mine has adopted a dog as a friend and quasi-family member. We were walking our dog Bonnie down a sidewalk in Vancouver when she got into a violent battle with a huge city-fattened rat who was lying hidden in the tall grass. Bonnie is a husky, a species of dog that may perhaps be described as just barely domesticated, more like the wolf in many ways than the normal pet dog. Presumably that had something to do with Bonnie detecting the rat, which probably was used to being ignored by the dogs. The battle that ensued was fierce and noisy and attracted a small crowd of passers-by. Quickly and inevitably, Bonnie won the battle and killed the rat. The interesting thing was that everyone, myself included, felt sorry for the rat. One lady even shed tears. Perhaps you, upon hearing this story, also feel some trace of sympathy for the rat. Even though the people who observed the fight all said that they were glad the rat was dead, that rats were dangerous, dirty, and so on, even so, all of them expressed some fellow feeling with the doomed animal. The rat, like the rest of us, worked to survive for a spell, but like the rest of us, cannot escape life's inevitable and sad return to ashes and dust. And it didn't even take mud baths. I mean, it did. No other species has our ability to sympathize with creatures very unlike ourselves. People will even chain themselves to trees out of sympathy with their arboreal brethren to prevent them from being cut down. The trees themselves, so far as we know and understand these things, are as unconscious as a patient lying etherized on an operating table. Even so, we are able to take their point of view and to see things from their perspective. In today's cinema, we depict creatures that are able to change their shape. These shape-shifters, as they are called, can assume the form of different species of animal at will. We human beings are all point of view shifters. We can take the point of view not only of other animals, but even plants, even of geological entities like the land itself, as the famous land epic of Aldo Leopold proves. Just as our nervous systems allow us to feel pain when our toe is damaged, even though the toe itself feels nothing, so too we are able to imbue the world around us with feelings. Although it is, of course, somewhat unscientific, one is tempted at this point to speculate whether or not there might be some logic to planetary evolution, analogous to the logic of animal evolution, some order in the unfolding of the universe, so that consciousness gradually expands its domain to include the least among us. And I think Mr. Yeaman might say something along those lines. Anyways, one final quote. Human sympathies can only unfold to their full extent when humans have met their basic needs for food, clothing, and shelter. When we are struggling just to exist and to provide for our children, we have scant sympathy for the rest of nature, or even for the rest of humankind. Environmentalists should take note. The sympathy of human beings for their environs, for everything around them, only blossoms when they are sufficiently prosperous. Insofar as the environmentalist programs now on offer result in increased struggle for mere survival, they will destroy the very sympathies on which they are based. To put it another way, nervous systems must and do have a privileged position in the bodies they serve and enlighten. Should your body, or the dog's body, or the rat's body, suffer from a shortage of food, or water, or oxygen, its nervous system will always be the last to experience the shortage. Because nervous systems are so beneficial to the animals that have them, they are provided special protection. As we evolve into the nervous system of the planet, if we do, we will have this privileged position. We do not have it yet, although it is there beckoning us. For the good of nature, for the good of the planet, we should accept this role. We cannot do this unless we prosper. So the path ahead of us that I am recommending is one of human flourishing. It is therefore a form of humanism. This form of humanism does not ask us to seek what is good for us at the expense of the rest of nature, but to seek the human good within the good of nature as a whole. It asks us to be on guard for the planet as a whole, to help it avoid collisions with meteorites that would wound it, to help it escape death by ice in the next ice age, and so on. It asks us to take responsibility for preserving life and consciousness on this planet. It asks that we seek reunification with nature as Gaia's brain.
Thank you very much. It's quite interesting. I want to turn the discussion over to, we have two individuals, Mary Beth and Jerry, right, who prepared questions. So we'll let them get it started, and then I'm sure that the observers have some great observations and perhaps some questions, and if you do, please write them down. If you feel comfortable, you can also say them, and I'll tell you when. I just want to check in if Robert, can you hear everything? And is the backup recorder working? Okay. Great, so I'll turn it over to both of you.
Mary Beth and I have agreed to play a tag team on Jeff. I'm going to jump off the ropes, and she's going to parade around the ring with, let us know what the round number is. First of all, I want to congratulate Jeff on his run of metaphorical explication. It was marvelous.
No problem.
Second, I want to, as kind of context, talk about two directions insights can go as they develop. An insight might develop into an idea, which might develop into a theory, which then develops into a hypothesis, which then develops into empirical test. Or an insight might develop into a vision, which would then develop into a plan. I want to pay attention to the first, insight, vision, plan. I think Jeff has presented us with a vision here. It goes beyond insight. It's big. And I'm very, very much taken with the metaphor of spaceship Earth, Gaia's brain and spaceship Earth. And it raises questions for me. I'm a sociologist. I've taught economic philosophy. It raises questions of practice. It raises the question of what specifically, questions of how. If we are the planet's nervous system, what does that mean? I read a lot of science fiction. And so I've got a lot of possible answers to what that might mean for us to be the nervous system of the planet, of spaceship Earth. Spaceship Earth. I've read stories about big spaceships. If you want to colonize Alpha Centauri, and you build a big enough spaceship to get there, you're not going to get there. Your great-great-great-grandchildren will get there. It has to be what's called a multi-generational spaceship. And that's what we're on. We're on a multi-generational spaceship. It's a very serious image. It's a very serious metaphor. It's very close to literal. Because our population has grown so much that the resources of the spaceship threaten no longer to support the population of the spaceship. So we just might not get to Alpha Centauri because we might have used it all up on going there. The question then is, how are we going to manage this darn spaceship? How are we going to run it so that it lasts until the end of the journey, of which we don't imagine. It's a journey it's a long one. Well, at least we want it to last for a few more generations. So the question is how? So I think, well, how? What other metaphors can be useful for a spaceship? A giant battleship? A giant aircraft carrier? These are things that are a little bit like spaceships. They have to have enough resources so that the people on them can do what they're going to do until they get to the end of the journey. And they might have to recycle some of their resources because they might not be able to bring it from somewhere else, which we can't. We've got to use it all here. And so how do you do that? Well, for us to be the nervous system of spaceship Earth, we've got to develop some kind of effective management information system. A company has got to manage itself by managing its information. Now, this also suggests, talking about this, we were thinking about the end of the age of agriculture, thinking about the possibility of another forum next year, discussing in more detail the end of the age of agriculture. Question came up for me is, what is this? What do you mean, the end of the age of agriculture? When I taught anthropology class, I taught about the foraging, hunting, gathering people, the foraging peoples, and that age shifted to a horticultural age where people gardened, and they didn't just move around and gather, they would plant stuff and move around and come back and harvest what they had gathered. Pastoralism developed, where the peoples followed their animals. As cultures developed even more thoroughly, they figured out how to plant and stay where they were. That was the beginning of the age of agriculture, in the Stone Age, maybe 10,000 years ago, where they learned how to have human settlements. They couldn't have settlements before because they used up the environment.
We're getting, I'm going to have to ask you
Okay.
a question, because your comment time is
Fine.
rapidly closing.
Thank you. I'm at the end of it.
Yeah.
The end of the age of agriculture. What's after the age of agriculture? It's the industrial age, it's the information age. Jeff's suggesting it's the information age. And that we're going to have to somehow or other, in the new age, figure out how to deal with information in a way differently than we dealt with it before. My question is, how?
Maybe building on what Jerry was talking about management systems, which is your idea about the moving into the information systems and the nervous system of the planet. In short, it reminded me of the comment in the brochure that is, art is an act of will in accord with a mature conscience. And I'm not sure if there's a relationship between Gaia's brain and the nervous system of the planet. I was talking to you about it, and it feels to me like we move into a era where we're intelligent enough, we understand the planet enough, we're kind of parenting the planet. Is that a mature conscience? Are those related concepts?
Well, since you seem to be asking me. My first response is yes. I don't know where it leads exactly, and my sense of our moral evolution is that it's the things that we learn not to do perhaps that are important or clearer at this point than what it is we should do. To go back to Jerry's question, but I mean, what we I think have learned not to do is to continue to fight for territory. That we should not continue to try to identify ourselves with our ethnic group, with our tribal group, indeed with our country, indeed with our religion. I mean, from a certain point of view, from the point of view of a brain, if we have an area that says that we're concerned solely with eating or solely with, and it gains upper hand or something, this is not proper organization. I mean, we have, like other species, fought basically with each other. I mean, your main competition if you're a robin is other robins, because only other robins are eating the worms that you want to eat, and only other robins are nesting where you want to nest and so on. So quite often, your most strong competition is with your own conspecifics, and we have just fought ourselves to rags. Let's get over that, first of all. And much as I think we should try to preserve ethnic groups, different languages, different cultures, different clothing, different food, different art, as part of the richness of the human experience, indeed of the planetary experience, I think we should stop fighting over it. And so that's, small as it is, I think that's a piece of mature consciousness. We should at least get on each other's throats here a bit. As for what next, I would say proprioception for a planet like us. Sensors everywhere. Let's put cameras in the bottom of every street and watch the whales go through. Let's learn what's happening, what the temperatures are, and chemical makeup of the atmosphere at different times, different places. Let's get the sensors out into our own body. As for motor control, maybe sometime. I mean, we're going to have to start a certain interior motor control first, right? Let's get this organized properly in a way that is safe. First of all, I mean, I'm going to.
No, you're not. Oh, you got another minute or two.
I was climbing with my brother one night, and we were up on the side of Mount Hector, and you're never supposed to go out of the camp at night, out of your tent and your boot liners and all this sort of stuff, you know. It's the middle of the night, and I tried to put off peeing as long as I could. We're on a glacier on a bit of a slope, I got the tent on a thing. I got so cold, I tried to get my boots on, but they're frozen. I ended up going out there anyways in my boot liners, and maybe it was because of my intense state of fear. And I'm sitting there peeing, you know, trying not to slide down the hill. There was a great hole in front of me, a great toilet going down this big hole in the glacier, trying not to. As I turn around, I see the peak of the mountain just cutting through the stars, like a hand of a clock. And suddenly I was at the edge of spaceship Earth, and it suddenly struck me how precious life is. We do not know that it exists anywhere, how precious life and consciousness is. Rule 1, every neonate, if there's a neonate Gaia, is self-preservation. We should keep that alive. We should keep life alive. Life is valuable. Even if we don't survive, we should make sure life survives. If we do survive, consciousness must survive. And then finally, I would say caring. Caring is extremely important, particularly for a nervous system. So that's a bit more mature, maybe.
Jerry, I wanted to just go back to you. Directed the question at the forum, to the forum in general. Did you want to respond to that before I open it up to the speakers at the table to respond to your question?
No, that's a good start of a response.
Okay. So, anybody else now who would like to, including the observers, respond to Jerry's question specifically, you know, what next, or ask a question? This would be a good time to do that. If you guys have written down any questions, and for those who are a little shy, I'll read them out. And then there's, so I'll open it up to those people who are seated and the observers. If at all you have any response to Jerry's question, or indeed a new question or a comment or any insight, please raise your hand and make yourself known to me. All right.
Thank you, everyone. This is interesting. It actually points to what is I only have a chance to touch on very briefly in my own paper, and that is the field of systems engineering that developed really in the 40s. The idea is that there's really a logistical and management system for, in Jeff's words, the people who have kept us alive, managed the whole shift to a sort of nuclear system since 1945. And I talked just a little bit, I guess, from anecdotal experience about the sort of mentality of the people who are operating under this system. And it seems that one of the biggest issues when we think about how to manage information, all this wonderful information that you're talking about, understanding more about nature, but it seems like we don't have a humanist infrastructure for accessing this information, for tabulating it, or for understanding it, because it does seem that to a large extent rationed based in, I guess, Enlightenment scientific methods, to the large extent still sort of dictates the way we intake information and understand it. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on possible sort of a new humanist model for understanding.
I do. I don't know how good they are. I mean, clearly, this is a picture of things that might come, but might happen, but aren't happening. We're isolated and we're reacting. I mean, if you look at a very simple organism, and I've got some biologists here, maybe help me out. But if you look at these little sea anemones that grow on the beach, for instance, the neurons aren't connected. They're all separate. Each neuron is connected to one muscle, and if you touch it, that one muscle will contract. But if it contracts sharply enough, it just bumps the ones next to it, and then they're mechanically sharpened. So the whole thing folds in a rather nice way. But we like that aren't connected in a way. We don't form a unity. We bump off of each other. Various things happen. Now, Jeff mentioned this morning, and I guess you mentioned it again. The people who control nuclear weapons. I know virtually nothing about that. My own sense, like many, maybe it's because I'm a professor, I live in a different generation. My own sense, even before, was that everyone's claim that nuclear war was inevitable, all weapons that have been ever designed have been used and so on, if true, would have happened by now. I mean, if it's true, why hasn't it happened? And I used to think, well, the reason it hasn't happened is because nobody can get away from this damn thing. I mean, if you hide in that mountain and you fire them off, you can't come back out again. I mean, so nobody has an interest in this, unless they're crazy. Of course, there are crazy. But as for how to control nuclear weapons, that the problem was recognized as far as I could go. I mean, I really don't know how to do that.
If we set aside the issue of nuclear weaponry, but going forward in the way that you're suggesting, I guess it seems like most of the ways we have of gathering and understanding information view things individually instead of part of a larger whole, and it seems that's what's missing. And it seems like that's what you're getting at, but
Part of a larger whole. I mean, is the whole forming?
Well,
We're getting
for me, I think one of the things that I've noticed is I think you've got and I don't know, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to interpret what you're saying is there's the information processing, but then there's the wisdom that comes with understanding how to apply the information and use it. And I think we certainly need what is periosensory or what?
Proprioception. Feeling your own body and controlling your own temperature.
I feel like if we're looking beyond the age of agriculture, yes, we need that. But I think so. On the one hand, we need to build sort of a model of the world, at least detailed enough to understand how to manage it in harmony with ourselves. But on the other side, we need to understand enough about ourselves in order to know what to do with that information and how to deal with the morality of that knowledge and taking that role. So that, you could call it moral development, you can call it development of conscience, which I would, tend to. That to me is also sort of a parallel track that we must travel on, I feel. And I do believe, I buy your argument. I think it's essentially something that we're probably already attempting on smaller and less integrated scales. But one of the things that came to my mind was, and I don't know if anybody here has any experience with complexity theory, but I get the sense that the institutions, and not just the brick and mortar institutions, but the institutions that we have, and I work with an institution, with the UN, that has individuals within it, and these are individual human beings that form networks that do things that are, influence the control and regulation. As you may suggest at some point, you're suggesting some sort of influence, control, feedback mechanism, like a nervous system. But the neurons or axons or whatever the elements of that system have to be sufficiently either networked, so they have to have a sufficient nodality, or they have to have sufficient processing capacity in and of themselves to deal with that complexity. I suggest that not only, the development of conscience, it's sort of the foundational principles have to be developed, but also, I just think on a pure nuts and bolts level, the complexity might be overwhelming for the current method by which we institute the brick and mortar institutions. I think that we need to think about other kinds of institutions that can handle that. So if anybody has ideas.
I think you're going a bit too far right at this point. I think our first steps here, and a lot of them will come out of the papers, is to try and understand what it is that we're talking about before we look for a solution or a vision past it. We are missing a tremendous amount of information. That information is, in my opinion, the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the equivalent of an asteroid hitting for human evolution. So as we watch, or as we know now, the destruction of the dinosaurs, that period of time was some type of cataclysmic event that happened that turned evolution away from its direction, because it will stay in a path. Its momentum will keep it in an inertial path, unless something very, very strong, something very, very powerful will turn that path. So I think that the first level of consciousness, especially for the humanities at this point, is that our, in a sense, asteroid, the thing that turned our evolution, our human evolution, were the dropping of those two bombs. But the inertial momentum of the evolution of civilization, which was out of the roots of agriculture, carried on in the forward direction in the inertial period. Now, we were very, very lucky. We were very lucky in that although the turn happened, we've managed to survive this far, because in the Cuban Missile Crisis, for the most part, those of us who lived through it, we died. It was as though the bomb had dropped. So there was definitely a tremendous amount of trauma at that point, and I think most of us denied it. We survived it. We said, hey, isn't this great? Let's forget about it. However, in that change, and in that moment of 1962, from 1945 to 1962, the unthinkable was what was proposed and went on in all of the weapons exploration. It's not a question of nuclear winter, and Jenny's paper will point this out. It's not a question of nuclear winter as to whether or not we all die in nuclear winter. It's whether our futures die. And if our futures die, that's nuclear winter. Now what happened, the genius of human beings in the last 50,000 years, which makes us our evolutionary state, is that we can anticipate and build a future. So when we've lost that sense that we can anticipate and effect it, which I think happened in 1962, we also lose the genius of our humans. And I think that's probably more what you're talking about. Rebuilding that first. Rebuilding the confidence that we can actually make it through. Now, this is very strange because a lot of you weren't born then. But I'm pretty sure that that level of consciousness is still here, that we imbued our children without a sense of future. And that a lot of the malaise that's going on now is, as Jenny will point out in her paper, the nuclear winter that we've experienced since then. So if we can make the turn, that's what we're trying to do. And in order to learn how to make that turn, we have to become consciousness conscious enough of who did make the turn, because somebody had. Every year the lemmings made it through another year because somebody moved that cliff a little farther away. None of us knows who it is. Maybe somebody here does, but we don't know who did that. Now, we're lucky enough to have gotten this far. Now the next question is can you make the turn? And I would like to think that these papers, as we come together, first take us to the point of at least understanding what that turn is. If we can get there, then maybe we can progress past here. But I don't think we can have a vision until we can actually face that reality.
Yes. Go ahead. I think whoever was. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. Brian mentioned, I think last night, he was general to high school students. They have no future. They have no plans.
Yeah.
And that cultural phenomenon is what you're addressing. Yes.
And I think it's pervaded since 1962. You remember, because, you know, you went through, where were you in university at that point? You're the eldest statesman.
62. 62. 62. Where were we in 62? We were in Berkeley at 62.
There you go. There you go.
Free speech movement.
And, you know, surely the terror must have gone right through everybody at that point.
Yeah.
We were all there. The unthinkable became thinkable. And when the unthinkable becomes thinkable, we all will go through that transformational change.
Yeah.
The difference is that we've all had ways of hiding it. We've all raised children, or many of us have raised children since then.
Yeah.
And so the denial factor of this thing is the first thing to overcome, because the inertial parts of all of this are the wreckage that we've seen of Kennedy being assassinated, the wreckage that we've seen of Martin Luther King being assassinated, the wreckage of Vietnam, the wreckage of Richard Nixon being elected, the residue of Richard Nixon being elected, which are Rumsfeld, Bush, and Cheney. That's all left over. We're still living in the wreckage of 1962. So until we can get past that particular wreckage in our own minds from the humanities, because we know somebody out there has been at least turning the levers, because most certainly the weapons that have been there, the unthinkable came to the thinkable or a proposition, and we in the humanities, as far as I can see, haven't applied ourselves to that reality. So if we can make that, the question here that I've always had about doing this, because as a foundation was created, the idea of a foundation is that we have a future. And what I recognize first is you have to recognize the facts on the ground before you can make the turn.
We'll come back to you because I have something before.
From what I saw of your paper, I thought that it had said that we have turned, and the direction we are going, we do have a future. It is the information age. I thought what Corinne said is we are already in the information age, and we are already moving forward. I don't see high school kids as much lazy bums, actually. I see them actually as being highly, highly productive and already heading in those directions. My son, coming from architecture, is more interested in electronic environments as opposed to physical environments, the traditional professions. I guess I maybe I misunderstood, but I thought yours was a model upon which we were already moving forward. I really don't even know that much about the nuclear winter. I don't feel it. What I do remember is reading some older authors in university about how world wars would be the worst thing in the world. Well, that's kind of past, and it became nuclear war. And the biggest worry we ever had was the nuclear war, and then after that, now it's the environment. I mean, we have moved through all the big worries, and we're still moving through them, and I'm sure we'll have more big worries, but I guess I had thought that we had already turned. We are starting to answer the question. First of all, yes, the age of agriculture has come to an end. Yes, done. What's next? What's next is the information age, and the reason for doing the information age is to save the planet, because we are all inevitably together as a species, and we have to stay on the planet to survive. We can't get off.
Okay, Jerry, you have
I'd be worried about the Chinese and the Africans, because they didn't go through 62 the way we did. However, I'm worried about half of America. because half of America are apocalyptoids. They believe that the rapture is coming, for heaven's sakes. I'm exaggerating a little bit, it's not quite half. But a very large proportion of that, almost 50%, who elected Bush for the last 8 years, they're evangelical Christians in the most fundamentalist, primitive sense. They believe the rapture is coming in the next 10, 15, 20 years. The second coming of Jesus, and these people are living and voting on the basis of that kind of consciousness. I don't know what to do.
Now, can I make a statement on that?
Please.
The problem that happened in 1962 was that this progressed on its inertial path because we defaulted. So this has been done by default. And as long as it's been done by default, then we have to answer for it. Now, one of the continuations of that particular thing is apparently the evangelicals now have an army. They've taken control of the American Air Force Academy. It's very serious stuff. Now, that is going to be a sense of trying to back that off. That's the reason why this starts with the question of tribalism before the end of the age of agriculture, because the view that I have of all religions is their metaphorical tribalism. So if you extend the concept of agriculture on an inertial basis and you link it to tribalism as an extension, religion as an extension of tribalism, then ultimately you will get back to that particular thing. That is the word. That's the word. So if by default we leave it to them, then they will certainly bring it about because they are interested in the rapture. They are interested in bringing about the rapture. So the alternative is to turn the corner. It's not a matter of speculating whether or not we have it or we haven't. We have not, because by default, only a minority of us are prepared to turn the corner, and we don't even know where it is yet. But we're getting there. I hope by the end of this forum, and with the papers that we have here, we at least recognize that you can turn the corner. And that's what I like so much initially about Jeff's paper, is it is about turning the corner. But we're not there yet. He's anticipating us turning the corner. And I think that there is some hope. I mean, the only thing is that we are where we are, and we've left it to the evangelicals by default. And the more of the infrastructure that they gain control over, the more likely that we're going to look at it. We're going to look at that kind of Armageddon on the basis that we let it happen by default. And that's a very, very serious consideration right now. And it goes on and on and on, by default. And who's defaulting? We default.
Can Sam's going to finish off this dialogue, but I do have one question from the floor that I guess I'm directing at the previous speaker, which is Jeff Foss. You talked a lot about metaphor, and I'm wondering, will quantum physics and theories and string theory, which includes the theories of the existence of parallel or other universes, eliminate the concept or the domain of metaphor? Just wondering if you could comment on the relationship between, newer developments in physics, string theory, and other universes, and how that. Yeah.
Gee, I don't know.
If you can, you don't have to answer it. I didn't know who it was directed to. It didn't say.
I've been fascinated with quantum mechanics and relativity theory since I was in high school. And one of the most curious things, I suppose, about quantum mechanics is the sense of everything being connected, of events in one place somehow being connected to events in distant places. Nothing being separated from the whole, in a sense. Holism reigns. I mean, to my mind, anyways, David Bohm's reading of quantum mechanics seems to be right on the fundamental grounds. That the quantum wave is the real thing, and everything else is kind of phenomena that's sort of generated from the wave. But I don't know what to say about that in a sense. Sometimes to me it looks just like the latest intellectual fad, and the scientists will change their mind and move on to something else. And other times I think it's got to be more than that because it's what's making the bombs work. I don't know.
He also has a short response to metaphor and quantum mechanics, parallel universes, and string theory.
And yes,
Yes.
I thought that's true.
Short.
I'm trying to give a short answer.
Okay.
We're macroorganisms, and it's very, very important to understand that this happens at a very micro level, at a very minuscule level. It happens at very small particles. And although these small particles are around us, they're passing through us at all times. Our microorganism, our cells, are all macroorganisms. The things that give us our consciousness, that we breathe, they are all done at a level of a macro level. We don't operate our consciousness at that micro level. Now, it's even dangerous, likely, to even think that we can. So it's not that we can hypothesize it, and it's not that we can even come to an understanding of it. But our evolution is big, it's fat. A single-celled animal compared to the particles we're talking about is huge. It's a giant mass compared to the particle physics that you're talking about. So when that happens, we can't organize that. Our consciousness, this is something that we wanted, that I think that we said in the insights at the beginning, is we're limited by the direction and the nature of our evolution. We can conceive of these things. We can even try to understand them in nature. But if we can't access something like a wormhole, which we can't do, because our evolution is direction. And it becomes directional because of the directional arrow of time. It gets very complicated, but there's a direction to time, there's a directional arrow to time. We're fixed to that arrow of time. That is our collective memory, and it's done at the macro level. So although we become aware of the micro level, we operate at a macro level. That means that our smallest human, or even life on this planet, molecule is 10,000 times, a giant star's times bigger than our smallest particle. So we can conceive of particles that small. We can build giant, giant machines to try and smash particles down that size. And the cosmos may operate at a level like that, but we can't. And so there's just going to be areas of our consciousness that we can't access. Maybe someday we will. We cannot access those right now. So there's no point in hypothesizing something that we absolutely can't. What happens when people hypothesize of those areas where we can't go is you end up with religion. So let's not hypothesize, or we'll never turn the corner. We will most certainly not be able to turn the corner.
That was a great question. That was a great question, though. And Sam, I promise to give you the last question. Go for it.
I just had a thought kind of following up on your second last point where you're talking about, and I think talking about what's going on now after an age of agriculture is kind of starting to dissolve. I just don't feel like there's such unification anywhere in the world. There's a lot of variance in what you might call different civilizations or different societies being at any given age. And I think that certainly parts of the world have progressed well beyond an age of agriculture, and parts of it are still well stuck in that mind frame. And I think that it's this variance in culture and in outlook that is really interesting to consider, because there's both variance in culture and variance in the way people can conceive of their problems and what they should be doing with their lives, and also variance in resources and variance in what people have access to driving things. And I liked your point a lot about the fact that nervous systems only function when they've got food. The environmentalists will only be worrying about the well-being of other things once they're eating. And I think that it's worth keeping in mind that lack of homogeneity, that we're not at some new age. And I think I certainly don't feel like we've progressed past the threat of nuclear winter at all. I certainly